Hello, my name is Mike the Mighty, and thanks for watching my video. Today I'm joined by JiggyJoe.
How goes it?
And Xerokitsune.
Greetings.
And on this podcast today, we're going to be talking about a number of different topics, a lot of discussion about what's going on right now in Guild Wars 2. And we're going to start off by talking about a couple of things. First of all, we're actually going to be talking about a sort of lack of content from the content providers. So people that would generally create things on Twitch, on Guild Wars 2, YouTube, on Guild Wars 2 videos. And there's generally been a little bit of lack of content recently from providers, and the number of people watching videos has actually dropped down significantly as well. And so let's start by asking Zero, what do you think is one of the reasons why there's been a lot of drop-off in, first of all, the content providers and also people watching this content?
Well, it's a matter of three different things, really, at least that I can see. First off, we're dealing with an older game, and there hasn't been any real... that leads into there hasn't been any new content releases from ArenaNet at this point, since ArenaNet hasn't really released anything except for PvP seasons. It's not all that much for people to report on and talk about and get excited on. And the third thing is, if they were going for the esports route, it's still kind of a mess to try to watch Guild Wars 2, because you can't really tell what anybody's doing unless you've played the game.
And Joe, would you concur on that?
No, I'd pretty much spot on agree. I mean, you said that the most recent content update we got was PvP, and even to that, it really wasn't, a whole lot of substantial content. There wasn't any, legit content to dig into. It was basically people were excited for the PvP fixes and changes for the new meta, for the new season to come out, and that's what we got. And no one really dug into that because right off the bat, ranked wasn't even available, so everyone was just doing unranked, and we couldn't really exactly figure out, everyone just, it didn't measure well, basically, because, no one played unranked. So basically, the last content update we really got was Heart of Thorns. And from then on, we haven't really had much.
Yeah, I feel that, as a content provider, as someone who creates content for Guild Wars 2, I think one of the main issues has been the lack of things that we can talk about. With Heart of Thorns, there was so much to discuss. And, what is there right now to talk about? We're getting a few raid things, the occasional raid that drops in. But the raids, you have 3 encounters and that's it. There's not much else, and as someone who doesn't really... I play raids, but I'm not really a hardcore provider of, content regarding raids. I leave that for the more elite, those YouTubers that focus on the elite. But even Twitch streamers have dropped off. And it's happened a lot, not only because Heart of Thorns, in my opinion, didn't really live up to expectations. I feel that, with the nerf of dungeons, people would stream dungeon runs and have people participate in dungeon runs. Fractals haven't really lived up to the expectation as well. And, for example, Joe, you've been trying to get on Twitch. It would be fantastic if you could, stream dungeon runs, for example.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I mean, one of the things I mostly want to do is push that the Twitch platform the most, because, you definitely do very well on the YouTube platform, and it doesn't interest me as much. So I would love to, sit there and stream, what I do on Guild Wars on a daily basis, pushing the dungeons and the raids, and all that. But, at the moment, it's just, I haven't had much interest in doing really anything other than maybe doing the occasional raid run and, dailies and stuff. But there just isn't anything there for us to, to jump on in terms of content. We're left to creating our own content and really digging down into the Guild Wars and figuring out what we need to do.
So basically, bringing out something that we can discuss, maybe bringing in a few changes, which we might get a little bit down the line, but you're right, there isn't even anything for us to really speculate on, because we've heard that Living Worlds, Season 3 isn't going to be coming out probably a minimum of the next 3 months, probably 4 to 6 months we're looking at. So,
correct. And I
yeah.
mean, for content, recently, Red Wing 2 was released, and they had some pretty cool stuff with the lore in terms of, once you, minor spoiler alert, but once you beat the final boss in that raid, there is a video that actually plays. And I'm not going to spoil anything that happens or what that video does, but the fact of the matter is that they actually included a lot of effort in that raid wing, in the lore, in the story, and just the presentation of it all. It's like, why are they putting so much effort into the raids when, there's all this other stuff that they could be pushing as well? They need to spread out their workers a little bit more, I think.
But that being said, I think the lore in the raid was really phenomenal. The stuff they did in the instance was really, really good.
Completely agree. And I think that you should definitely, if you don't feel like pushing for this current raid wing right now, as the current community seems to be pretty thin, I would definitely suggest looking into that lore if you get the chance, if you can't manage to get a group going for that.
Well, oddly enough, the video that they have at the end of the raid wing that pretty much is spoilers, they threw up on their official channel.
Yeah.
That they did. And I feel like they probably should not have done that, considering it's their official channel, and other people are going to be looking at it thinking, either they're new players thinking, oh, this looks pretty neat, I might get into this, but they actually can't because they're new players, and there's just that huge time sink that they have to get into before they actually enjoy the raids and see this progression that's going on. And on top of that, you have people who were looking at it, kind of sitting on the sidelines, looking to wait for the new content updates and releases, and what they get is a spoiler video on their channel,
Yeah, and I have to say, I do think the cutscene was really well done, and it's a really cool cutscene, and I think it's been really well done in the raid, and I think that's really made people want more out of it and want more things, particularly to do with Guild Wars 1, and how, things that tie back into the original game generate so much interest. Well,
yeah, for sure. I'm sorry, you can go.
No, I was just going to say, I think that pretty much covers, why we've had a really lack of, content from providers, on Twitch and YouTube. And, even if you look at the Reddit seems to be much, much quieter in the recent weeks.
Yeah, there's just not a whole lot to talk about at this point. You get a lot of fluff posts going on, and some minor speculation. But other than that, it's basically you either have a bunch of negative people talking about how there's not a lot going on, or people trying to tell them, be quiet, they're doing stuff or whatever, defending ArenaNet or whatever. And otherwise, it's all, the rest of it's just fluff and questions.
Also, we still have to remember that we haven't seen anything come out since the leaving of the game's head lead designer, or head Colin Johansson. So a lot of people have questions up in the air. What's going on? What's going to happen? What will be Guild Wars 2 from here on forward? And we haven't had any patches that have really put anything out since.
Well, let's talk about another issue while we're getting a lack of content from providers. A number of other content providers, if you think, if you actually look at the partner program that ArenaNet ran, that shaman put out a Twitter post actually this past week, and he looked at the content providers, the partners in the partner scheme, and less than 50% are still creating content for GW2. So 50% are no longer providing content on Guild Wars 2, which is pretty incredible. And I for one have actually applied for the partner program several months ago and have heard nothing back from that. But people like Matt Visual, who was a pretty decent sized YouTuber, he's stopped playing Guild Wars 2 pretty much. There have been others that have moved on to different games as well. And let's talk about that. Guild Wars 2 can't afford to keep standing still, because there are other games that have come out, and let's talk about some of those. If there's been a game that went free to play that drew in a lot of good audience, and that was Blade and Soul, a game that I didn't really get into too much. But other new games are a big popular game right now, Black Desert Online, as well as other content, other non-MMO games out there. So let's talk to you two. Have you two played any new MMO in the past 2 months other than Guild Wars 2?
Yeah, I've actually played a pretty decent amount of them. I myself kind of am looking for that new experience. And while yes, I do very much enjoy Guild Wars 2, it's a fantastic game. It's kind of become a little bit dry and repetitive in a lot of ways. If you're a brand new person looking for an MMO, definitely hop onto Guild Wars 2. There's more than enough content there, but if you're a veteran right now, things are looking very thin, and we're left kind of just sitting here wondering where the next content update is. But in terms of alternatives, Black Desert Online is definitely a great game. It's got a humongous learning curve in that it's a little bit more grindy considering it's a Korean MMO. As anyone who ever played a Korean MMO will know, there's just tons and tons of grind, fetch quests and et cetera, et cetera. But on top of that, the UI is very cluttered and there's a lot going on to dig into for a new player. So there's kind of that giant learning curve for that game. But on top of that, Counter-Strike has been up there, in terms of people playing it. It's a very popular game and has always been, and I'm pretty sure that it will always be one of the top games, considering it's such an older game and it's just so popular. Yeah. And then more recently, we actually have The Division, which I would actually like to bring up, even though it is a brand new game and has only been out for maybe like 2 weeks, if that. It's a pseudo MMO style RPG / looter shooter game. So it's got a mixture of several games. The most competitive game I can really compare it to at this point is The Division, or I'm sorry,
Destiny.
Destiny, yes. Destiny and Borderlands, as well as Diablo. So those are the games I can really compare it to at this point, other than the shooting aspects is more like Gears of War kind of style. Otherwise, it's more so the fact that it's a fantastic game. It's not perfect and by any stretch of the imagination, but it's got a lot of good things going for it. It's got a really good set base. It's got a lot of really good content. It's got a pretty good narrative and backstory. And the game was created, basically as a one-in-one style version of New York City, and it looks fantastic. Like I showed you some screens earlier, and you were pretty impressed by it.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, and it looks fantastic. But what I'm talking about here is the communication between the developers and the community has been just phenomenal. Like, I haven't told you about this yet, but it's just been so refreshing. Like, they do weekly updates and patches, as well as maintenance on the servers, where they take the servers down for a little bit. But during that server takedown, they actually do a live stream of all the changes and updates that they're going to be doing. But on top of that, they also do live streams of their game with the developers that are actually playing the game, where you can actually talk and ask questions and interact with them constantly. And they actually are open to suggestions and content. Like, they're talking about like putting game or specific items in the game being 100% community driven, other than like the modeling and the animations and all that.
Yeah.
But I think that's just it's fantastic. And they're just, for the issues in the game, they're being very they're talking back and forth between each other and trying to figure out solutions. It's just so refreshing to see a game actually do that, and it makes me very, very hopeful for the future of that game.
What about you, Zero? You played any different MMOs at all recently?
I actually played some of the older MMOs lately. I went back to freaking ESO for a little bit, and occasionally I log into WildStar, but that one, it does not feel well for me. I like the themes and the concept and the story of WildStar, but I do not like the gameplay. And ESO, I like the gameplay. The story just feels kind of blah. As to any of the new ones, I haven't played any of them. I've seen interesting bits on them, but not enough to tempt me into them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I've played Black Desert Online, and it is a phenomenally beautiful game. The detailing is incredible, and just you're right about there being a very, very steep learning curve, and there being a huge lot of grind. But one thing it has made me appreciate is how amazing Guild Wars 2 is in terms of, having like heart quests, dynamic events, and it really does hit home that even though Guild Wars 2 is coming up 3.5 years old, it's still a phenomenal game. However, they haven't really kicked on from what they brought out in GW2. With the release, they've added, they've filled it out a lot. Things like the wardrobe system, phenomenal. And other things like, changing the way that the traits work is much, much better now. But they really need to kick on from, the initial release. Everybody was amazed by it. And now people are like, well, yeah, it's not really pushed on from there, has it?
Well, there hasn't. They've done some things. I mean, the Living Story updates, and you've combined that with Heart of Thorns, and all of it together is about the size of a big, huge expansion, and then some.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it was incremental, and I believe there's an old saying about a pot and boiling frogs.
Yes, yeah.
You keep raising the water just ever so slightly, or just filtering in the content ever so slightly. And yes, it did for a while make the game feel organic, but it also gave kind of a false stale feeling to it as well.
And even to that false stale feeling, I feel as well that for those especially for the first season, they got little burnt out. I think they actually admitted to burning themselves out on the content. And in doing so, they extended, the periods of time in which they're actually releasing the content. And I feel like that definitely damaged them in the long run. They got a little too cocky, a little too, a bit more off than they could chew, which, I, as someone who doesn't develop games or is outside, consuming the content they're releasing, is completely understandable. But at the same time, even to this day, I feel like they're still kind of on their initial success high horse, as in they're talking about a lot of the stuff that they're kind of partially working on in ways that they should not be. And things that they have been releasing lately, they've been acting like is the greatest thing in the world. I mean, they, like, in a lot of ways, like, sure, I very much appreciate the new Red Wing, the Salvation Pass and everything that comes with it. But the way that they actually released and announced Slothazor just made me cringe beyond, just beyond words. Just because, oh, look at this cool boss we've been working on, and it looks so cute and funny, and we're gonna be all, fluff and hot air and talk about it in such a fun way, like, we're so amazing, guys, look at this cute boss. And it's like, okay, cool, I appreciate the boss. I'm sure it's difficult because it's a raid boss. It looks cute, but you guys are sitting here making all these jokes and trying to be funny when you guys aren't really doing well. I'm sure you guys do it a lot, but we're sitting here in the biggest content drought in the world. It doesn't seem funny anymore.
I think the response that they had to something like that was they didn't want to show the end boss. They didn't want to show the that it was linked to the White Mantle. And then less than 2 weeks later, they released the end credits video for that wing, showing that, it was the White Mantle.
Yeah, and I agree. They were in the right in, not releasing spoilers. I mean, good for them. But I'm more so getting at the behavior of the overall, just the community, towards the community, rather. And every little thing that they release, it feels like they're, personally, it feels like they think they're, like, the greatest, content developers in the world. Even, know how big or how small it might be.
I'd be a bit worried about them if they didn't actually have some sort of ego and think that they were doing fantastic.
Yes, but also at the same time, I think they need to humble themselves a little bit and be like, guys, we apologize for, the way we've been lately. Hope you understand, but we need to work together as, community and as developers to solve these issues instead of just, jokingly talking about things and keeping us in the dark about everything.
Well, yes, and I also think that, one of the reasons why we've been talking about, like, what other games can, people play, because we don't really have too much to talk about right now. And, as, you've mentioned to me, a lot of people are just sort of taking some time out of the game. They're maybe logging on for the dailies or not even bothering for that. And that's kind of sad to see that the goals that people have right now, they're sort of, that there's not much to do in the game right now. That they're just taking a step back because there isn't too much that they're focused on.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And there's absolutely no shame in taking that break, because personally, I found that is a very positive thing about the game is that there's no subscription fees. Sure, I don't really need to remind people of that, but it enables everyone to take a break whenever they're feeling, the repetition of any game, in general. And there are other great games out there that they're willing to try, whether it be a backlog of games that people haven't had time to finish, or just another game that just was recently released that they can check out. There's always that new experience that come out, and there might not be one right now, but I know there's some coming out in the future that could be actually pretty decent, even if the MMO genre in general has been struggling lately.
Well, let's move on then, and let's talk about something a little bit more positive, possibly. And that's the April patch that's going to be coming out next month. This is their quarterly patch that they have. So they released one in January. This actually came out January 26th. To give you an idea when in April you might expect it. So it could be any time from the first week to the last. And in January, we actually had some major new features actually come out. We had the new squad UI, which gave us squad markers, which are phenomenal. Everybody uses them really in squads now. We also had gliding in Central Tyria, again, phenomenal. We also had some polishing that came out, just made things a little bit tidier. We also got some changes to fractals. For example, you can just stay inside the Mistlock Observatory, which is much, much better. They changed some of the bosses in fractals with some of the resets. They also brought out a few, they'll change some of the, for example, effects that come with certain items. And they did change a lot of the traits. For example, Diamond Skin got its big change. We also had changes to Engineer. And it was actually a pretty big change regarding a lot of, well, I said pretty big change. A lot of people didn't think it went far enough regarding some of the skills. We also had brought out, they changed bits of change to PvP, particularly the matchmaking and some of the sigils in PvP. They also brought out Tybalt Leftpaw. He was a new Mist champion. And we also had changes to World versus World, automatic upgrades. They changed. Points per kill, for example, and the combat revive change, as well as some general basic fixes to banners, for example, and guild claiming. They also changed a lot of things for bosses. For example, Shatra had some changes to it, but that was basically a lot of the changes that were brought in. So what can we expect from the April update? Well, I'm going to throw this over to Zero and Joe first of all. What do you think? What are you expecting from the update in April? Zero, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm fully expecting them to go forward a bit on whatever scribing cost changes they're looking to do.
Yeah.
And possibly some of the reward changes for the new Heart of Thorn maps and the reward changes for fractals. Because all of those seem like levers that are fairly easy to make adjustments to. Not saying programmatically easy, but it's just mostly tweaks.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they've already said that they are going to. I think they've said in the Ask Me Anything Reddit thread, they did say that they are making some improvements in obtaining the new gear, the new Heart of Thorns gear, and they said they are going to be releasing that in April. They said it might not fully resolve the issue, but that it's going to be changed for completely altered for Living World Season 3. And what about anything else to add on that?
I hate to say it, but I'm going to go in a slightly negative direction, and I'm going to say the things I don't expect to see out of this. I really don't expect to see much in the lines of World versus World changes. They're probably going to throw in a couple of minor tweaks.
Yeah.
And I expect that we're going to see a bunch of balance patches to our players based off of PvP again, which is probably going to break some raid dynamics all over again.
Yeah.
And we're going to end up possibly seeing them restore like a gold value or something for the dungeons. And if we're lucky, they might add like one new weapon or something odd. And of course, our whatever the heck the April 1st thing is going to be, because on April 1st they're going to release something that's going to be silly. I don't expect it to be Super Adventure Box. I expect it to be something completely unrelated, like a graphical twitch, or allow gliders to be sideways that day, and then later on they're going to have it where you can buy a little box that'll have everybody's glider be sideways or something fun like that.
What about you, Joe? You got anything to add on to that?
Yeah, just kind of a funny thought I just came up with. I think they should bring back the aviator situation, but only have it set when you're gliding in the air.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic. And I think that'd be a great use of their new central gliding interior. You know, you see everyone with their arms out and it just disables the glider. You just see people, you know, flying in that manner. But I actually completely agree with Zero. I do not expect really anything other than a few changes, maybe tweaks in World v World. I don't expect to see, you know, that resurgence big World v World update until July, August of this year, if that even, you know. At this point, I don't know where this table is located, but anything that they have on this table or under the table or near the table seems to be kind of a non-existent thing at this point. So otherwise, I completely agree with everything that Zero said.
Yeah, and I will say as well what I could expect. I think that they, to try and placate the community, I think they're going to introduce some new legendaries. I think that in a month's time they will have at least 2, maybe 3 new legendary weapons that they'll throw out and people can get, just so that, you know, people can go for this and see how cool they are. And I think we'll see some balance patches. I think, you know, Engineer needs to have that little less sustain. You know, I don't think there's too much that's overpowered right now. I think potentially you could maybe slightly nerf some of the boons given out by the Revenant, maybe just some of the duration. But generally, I think the Revenant's in a decent place. Warrior, what could you say? I think, you know, Warriors generally are okay. Guardian, perhaps some of the nerf is maybe a little bit too harsh, but I think generally it's also in a decent place. And you look at the light, you know, Ellie's, no problem with Elementalists. Mesmers, maybe they could have a fix to the Well of Precognition. Maybe, you know, the nerf to that was a bit extreme. Maybe they could just bring it back a little bit. Necromancer as well, I think maybe the condition damage is a tad too high. Maybe just bring it slightly down a little bit, maybe by just 10% or so. And then if you look at the mid classes, a ranger in a decent place with a druid, I think they are. I think the thief is in a fine position. I don't have any issues with the thief right now. So I don't think there's too much regarding the balance patches, because, you know, just to compare Season 2 of PvP to Season 1, Season 1 was, everyone was moaning about the meta. I don't think I've actually heard anyone moan about the meta in Season 2. I mean, have you, Joe?
Not really, other than, you know, condition damage kind of being the reigning champion. I think that they definitely went a better approach in terms of the meta with being offensive opposed to defensive. I feel like they could definitely, you know, do the tweaks that you suggested and maybe even increase some of the defense, you know, kind of strike that nice, just that nice area, that medium that we've been kind of needing. I feel like they're definitely getting a little bit better with the balance in lately, and that I could definitely give props to them for that.
I'm going to just throw this out there. With Season 2 of the PvP, which I personally didn't take part in myself, you see a whole lot less people actually with the icons over their head now. Because the first season, almost every single person that was on almost any map out there had at least amber sitting over top of their head, showing that they played in. And
that was lately, I was going to say that was a lot more noticeable when you came up against world bosses, wasn't it?
Oh yes, and now if you go on a world boss train, you see maybe 3, 4, possibly 5 people that have the different icons over their head. and the rest of them not so much. So it might actually be that the PvP, due to the fact that not many people were taking part in it, not to say that there was a low turnout, but not as much of their full swatch of players took part in.
Yeah.
It may have affected it.
No, I definitely feel there's a lot less people playing PvP this season, which is kind of real. I think it was the first season was kind of a novelty, and generally I think there are a lot less people playing the game at the moment. So they did say that a lot more people are playing PvP just in general. So the rewards I think are actually pretty decent, for playing PvP. I have no issue at all with the rewards there. But if we're also looking at what's going to happen, potentially in April, I think absolutely Zero, you're right. I think they will make some changes to, I'd want them to make some changes to scribing. I'd also think that dungeons are definitely something they need to bring in. It's a nice stepping stone, bringing the rewards back to somewhere reasonable. It's a nice stepping stone from players when they get to level 80 to go into dungeons with 5-man content, then to step up to fractals, then to raids. It's a very, very smooth, sort of rising in terms of difficulty. But going from level 80 straight into hard mode of, sort of fractals, it's kind of difficult. Particularly the limitation.
Actually,
yeah, go on.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
That's fine, go ahead.
Even in the same vein, I've run into a couple of players who were fresh level 80s. They not members of our guild, mind you, just random people. They jumped straight from level 80 into hot maps.
Yeah.
And there they are. They're wearing blues, greens, and random different things that they accumulated through the levels.
Yeah.
And they're wondering why the heck everything is murdering them instantly. Because all regular maps are hard zones as well.
And I think that's a really good valid point on that.
I completely agree. And in terms of that, I think that they need to include. I think they need to include actually that change that they were talking about with the dungeons. I think they need to include that in the April patch, because what's going to end up happening is, having the possible return players. I'm sorry, it's not 100%. Coming back to the game, because the dungeons was definitely, it had a special place in my heart, and it would definitely consider me, going back and playing them and enjoying them for nostalgic reasons / for gold reasons. It would put them in a good spot, it would show that they made a bad decision and they reverted on that. But on top of that, we all know that when the third quarterly update patch comes out, there's going to be people out there talking, in a negative way towards that as well, saying, oh, they just threw back dungeons, just for, quote unquote, for more content kind of deal,
But I was going to say, I do think if they did change the rewards, it would really, I think it would re-energize the community a lot. Everyone would be playing a little bit longer, people would be logging on for longer to do some dungeon runs, People would be like, oh, okay, logging on, maybe do it to fractals. Okay, I'll do some dungeon runs, they've got a lot more to do. I would just like to quote as well Mike O'Brien from Here's Ask Me Anything. And he did say that this was the paragraph regarding the April shipping date. So the final thing you should know is that we're working hard to avoid having a default assumption that, quotation mark, this thing will ship on this date, or this thing will ship, end quotation mark. And instead we're proactively deciding to ship things when they're done and polished, and we've played them and loved them. So if you ask us for a list of things that we will ship in April, we'll probably be coy because we think it's nice for you to have presents to unwrap on release day. But more than that, the truth is we don't even know. We're working on a lot of potentially great improvements for April, all themed in the direction of less grind and more rewards. They won't all make the cut, but any reasonable subset will make a great release. So that was actually what Mike O'Brien said in his Ask Me Anything. And I'd like to ask you two, if you could have one or two things brought in April, what would it be? What would you think, something not, if you compare it to what they released in January, they brought in couple of new things. what do you think, or what would you like to see in April that they release that you've heard mentioning of, or something that you might have even come up yourself?
I'm gonna be honest. If Mind you, this is kind of in the pie in the sky territory because it's bringing back something and they'd have to do a revamp of it.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
But I'd like to see them like bring back something like Dragon Bash or a holiday event that they actually have to do heavy changes to.
Like the Queen's Jubilee, perhaps?
Not so much. They've already brought back the Queen's Jubilee once. But Dragon Bash was a thing. They brought it in once. We had one of our captains murdered. And then, ta-da, it hasn't happened again since. And since then, we've had Lion's Arch destroyed once. I'm not sure exactly how many times we've had it destroyed.
Rebuilt, basically, yeah.
Completely rebuilt from the ground up. So we've got all of these beautiful presentation areas, all of these fantastic spots to use in this area. And yet we haven't had a single thing here because, quote unquote, the humans are paying off all of the holiday vendors. Something like that, while that wouldn't be a great draw, it would at least be something for the people who are still here. For something to be able to cause a great draw, they would have to actually drop something like the World versus World big changes and then go, and by the way, Season 2 happens today. Congratulations, everybody go get your shinies.
Yeah.
But I don't see that happening in any way, shape, or form.
But yeah, I think that's a good idea. Have like a week-long festival event of some kind. Anything else before we move on to Joe?
Well, other than an interesting holiday that we haven't seen in a while, or something completely new in that direction, maybe just an inkling, or kind of like how we got the Season 1 recap rolled over in Lion's Arch all of a sudden, where we could all of a sudden get the Season 1 gift, maybe like a Heart of Thorns recap or something silly like that.
Yeah. What about you, Joe? What would you love to see in the April release?
I would love to see them stick to their word and do what they have said they're going to do. I'm perfectly fine with them. Say we're not gonna mention dates because we don't know that ourselves. But I definitely think they need to hype up what they are 100% certain they will, release. If they're not going to give a date, they need to talk to us about it, kind of give us an idea, because we need to be excited about this. We're sitting here, it's the 20th, correct? I think it's the 20th of March.
Yeah.
And we have no idea what is going to be coming out. We have some ideas, bug fixes and all that, but they haven't really said any content exactly. It's all fixing what we've already released, changes, balances, etc., etc. And I feel like they need to. I'm not going to be specific about anything at all. Zero's mention of festivals that we haven't seen in a while and or new festivals. Completely, I would love to see that. Dragon's Bash was mentioned, and I would love to see that. But for the past 2.5 years, we've had rehashes of festivals, except with a few minor changes.
Yeah.
But I would love to see new festivals. That was one of the things that made me really, really enjoy Guild Wars 2 as a whole, especially during Season 1 when I played a lot, was the festivals, that 2012 Halloween festival and how involved they were, and how, it just felt like it was evolving, it was changing, and it felt just, it was impressive to say the least. And to see them kind of going back to kind of that general approach opposed to oh, this was great, you guys enjoyed this, right? Let's just give them more of that. It's kind of, they're pandering to the audience when they could be being expressive about their content, and they could be releasing new stuff, things that what I want is I don't want things that I want things that I did not know I want.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah,
that makes sense.
But even things like, you look at the festivals that we had in the first couple of years, even like, the Zephyrite Sanctum was a great thing that we had. That obviously can't come back in, although that, it might have to do some modification for that because obviously the Zephyrite's crashed. So how do you bring? You can't. It's difficult to bring that back. Dragon Bash. You remember the holograms flying around, and then you had the murder of one of the captain's council. So what can you do there? I just think that they've really last year they didn't bring out enough festivals, and that would be good to see. My own personal preference for what I'd like to see in the April patch, I'm not too keen on seeing anything to do with balance patches. I think they're all fine. I would like to see some new legendary weapons. Would I go for them? Maybe, depending on what one it would actually be. But yeah, I mean, what else would I like to see in the update? Zero, I thought you were going to mention something about scribing. Obviously, from our guild's point of view, we're actually almost at max level guild. So maybe they could bring out some new things for the guild halls. They've been pretty quiet on the guild hall front, and we know that they've got a dedicated team working on guild halls. I'd like to see them bring in new items or new things that we can spend the resources on, because we've pretty much finished our guild hall.
It'd be nice to see them, not necessarily even new items. I'd love to see them go, okay, here's the other race's furniture.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Because at the moment, it's almost entirely, with a few minor exceptions, it's almost entirely human furniture as of yet. I think the fire pit circle that you made was a Norn item.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some of the summit flags which are kind of neutral. But overall, it's almost all, hey, let's grab something from Divinity's Reach or the scrap parts of Divinity's Reach. And ta-da! With the exception of the holidays. The holidays they add new stuff with. But I'd love to see like some of the Asuran workbenches, or the Char's most uncomfortable couch in the world, or any, like some of the Norn throw pillows, or one of the Norn beds, or something like that.
But even for me, what I would love to see most is for them to restore the rewards for dungeons. That's pretty much it, and that's old content because I want to play them again. I enjoy playing dungeons. And, it's something that ArenaNet could do very easily. It wouldn't affect the world economy massively compared to... It might bring in a bit of inflation that would put prices up a bit. But I think it's definitely something that the player base are asking for and that they need to do. I think they're already going to be bringing in the change to reset for World versus World back from Saturday to Friday, because they're no longer needed to do fixes on Fridays now. But there's also one other thing that I was interested. I mentioned about the legendary weapons. But also, all right, here's the question to you. You said that, you thought about April 1st, you don't think Super Adventure Box. Do you think it could come out in the April patch, or do you think it can come out this year? What are your thoughts on the Super Adventure Box?
I can see it coming out this year. But I have a feeling that if they're going to drop it this year, it's probably going to be kind of along the same lines as when they dropped it for the second time. And that will be a back-to-school patch.
But can you imagine, though? I'm sorry to, but can you imagine, though, if they did release it in April, would that be enough of a... Because I'm assuming it could be, they could maybe release a new world, but they don't even have to do it. Many people haven't played it in such a long time. Can you imagine if they brought it back in, how it would re-energize the player base?
Absolutely. It would be, mind you, it would be a short, quick re-energizing of the player base, but it would definitely bring in quite a few people who have kind of fallen off.
Exactly.
Because at that point, ta-da, Super Adventure Box pops right the heck back up. Then I guarantee there's going to be a bunch of streams of that because, well, Super Adventure Box only 4 or 5 skills for you to be able to show off.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of interesting to even watch people go through that thing in the craziest of manners, especially in tribulation mode. And yeah, I could see that actually being a fairly high draw.
Well, what about you, Joe? Would you be hyped for SAB?
I would, but at the same time, I would love for ArenaNet to prove me wrong on this. I want them to definitely release something else new. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I don't understand why they haven't actually released anything, Super Adventure Box or Dungeons, because if you look at it this way, we had the game just recently go free to play. So we have this entire new player base coming out and enjoying the game.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Dungeons basically in untapped mode at this point. And I feel like they should have reverted that change for the gold and whatnot, so that we could have had the veteran players going back to the dungeons and also showing off the new players how cool the dungeons are, and showing how to teach them how to do it themselves. And on top of that, they could have had Super Adventure Box, or at this point they can have Super Adventure Box, to show kind of what we got to experience as well and how awesome that is. It's a good amount of content, and even personally myself, I hate to say this, I did not get to experience that much of Super Adventure Box, only because I didn't have enough time when it did come out to experience it. Yeah. But what I did play of it, I absolutely enjoyed, and it was completely, left field, did not expect it, and it just encouraged me to, love the developers, even, a ton, and I had a very hopeful future at that point.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with Zero. Yes, it would be. I feel like the dungeon change is kind of a necessity at this point. If they do not release it during this quarterly update, I feel like they are just going to lose that chunk of the community for good. Like, period. Like, they're not going to come back.
But I was going to say that, if we look back at what happened in January brought in some major big features, particularly if we, look at Tyria gliding, the UI, squad UI, big balance changes. Do you expect them to bring in something as game-changing as core Tyria gliding for April?
Personally, no, I do not. If they did, they would probably have teased it by now in one of their abysmal guild chats.
Yeah, that's been terrible recently. Yeah,
something. Those basically non-existent at this point for anything. They're just kind of filler talk and fluff, and as I was saying, just laughing and chatter and all that jazz. But it's a matter of they definitely how best way to describe this. They definitely, I think, kind of missed that window of hype, where to the point where I don't think they're going to be releasing anything that quote unquote major, even though Glide and Interia and the boss change wasn't even that massive to begin with. It was just kind of something they tossed in, something they thought we'd enjoy. They found out they could do in the other development processes of other things, and just decided to toss it in there. But I don't expect anything to be that massive in this patch, to be honest.
Yeah.
But again, I would love for them to prove me wrong. At this point, it's a matter of they need to prove me wrong. They need to prove a lot of us wrong. They need to bring back a lot of the players who enjoyed the game before. Otherwise, it's just going to be all of the people that enjoyed, loved the game, and supported them all these years. They're going to be leaving because there's nothing for us to do. And it's like, sure, that's fine. We'll come back when there is stuff for us to do. But at the moment, it's mostly just new players who are going to be enjoying the game.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of stuff today. Have you guys got any final comments that you want to make on, anything we've covered today, or do you think we've pretty much summed everything up?
I think that we kind of summed most of it up. There's not all that much to talk about since the last time we had a conversation, since they haven't added anything really in.
Yeah, and I agree. There's not a whole lot to talk about as well. And again, I'd like to just reiterate, there is no shame in taking a break. So, guys, go out there, play your Hearthstones, try out your divisions, try out your Black Desert Onlines, see what else there is out there. Because ultimately, it's like you get to spend your time a little bit better. And if you enjoy this game, that's perfectly fine. But there's no shame in showing them that you are just disinterested in the game at the moment, and you're not losing money in doing so.
Well, even if it's not a case of disinterested, it's always good to take a break to refresh yourself back to the things that you loved in this game.
There you go. Yep, there's no shame in that.
Well, just to say thank you very much for those of you who've listened all the way through. Please leave any comment section in the comments section below. And if you would like to be part of this as well, more than willing to have you take part in Maikai Talk. Just leave a message in the comment section. And a big thank you to JiggyJoe.
Yeah, no problem.
And also to Xerokitsune.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you guys on the next video. Thanks for watching.